these letters were written to the churches, and because many of these churches never met Jesus face to face, and they did not have a direct teachings from Jesus. Just not like these apostles. These apostles were traveling with Jesus, and they spent like 3 years with Jesus and taught by Jesus directly. So they know what Jesus has in his mind and who he is and everything. But these churches later on, many of them never met Jesus in person. So they needed to have some guidance. And these are the contents of these letters. First, instructions. It has a lot of instructions about how the church should be, how it should be ran, and what to do and what not to do. So these are the things that are like a detailed matters for the church. And as they received these letters, they not only read by the leaders only, but it was copied and given to the church members and who were able to read. So there are many copies made out of these letters, and because of that, because they made the copies, we still have these manuscripts or copies, and there are thousands of them. So thanks to the hard work of these copiers who were able to handwrite the letters, and so instructions and also doctrines, because Jesus taught certain things, and as a church you need to kind of have a systematic way to understand what we believe as a Christian. So Christians have something called doctrines. Actually, every good religion or the major religion have their doctrines. Doctrine is the description or statement of belief. And even today, we have summarized these beliefs into a certain system, and usually we call as so there is something called a confession or creeds. Creeds or confessions are the well organized, well written summary of doctrines. Summary of doctrines. So confessions or creeds are summary of doctrines, and it is important to know these confessions and creeds if you are a Christian, because these clearly and summarize our faith or our belief in a very short way. It is concentration of what we believe. And one of the famous confession is like a Westminster Confession. It's like written in year 1500 or 1400, somewhere there, and they kind of summarize what we believe. So these letters help the church to know what we believe as a Christian and what we do not believe as a Christian. So thus there are warnings against the doctrines that are not Christian. So because of that, doctrines we have something called heresies. Heresies, they warn against heresies. Heresies are it looks pretty much like a Christianity, but actually it is not. There is some difference. For example, some heresies believe that Jesus is the Son of God, and they say that, but they say Son of God is a little less than the God the Father. And the Holy Spirit is not a person, it is only the Spirit. It is like a feeling. So when someone says that, it's not a sound doctrine or correct doctrine. It is not a good doctrine. And when that happens, it becomes heresies. And even in Jesus' day, right after Jesus was ascended to heaven, and there were some heresies, and it continues to happen. And even in today's Christianity, there are many heresies. They look like Christianity, but they are not. For example, in Korea, we have something called Moonism. It's by Sun Myung Moon, and they say it's a unification church. Unification church is not a Christianity. It sounds like a Christianity, but it is not. And they are called heresies. And let's see. So these letters written to the churches to make sure that we believe in the same thing. And it also gives the instructions to the problems and issues that the church faces. So what do we do when today, as a church, when there's a problem within the church, then you go into these letters and find out what to do. So letters are very useful for the church. And it also gives instruction to your personal belief. How you should do the devotion, how you come closer to God, how you pray. These things are included in these letters. So as a believer, it is important to read those letters given by Paul, Peter, James, and John, and others, and get those instructions how to. So that's content of the lectures, and then we'll just cover some of them, not all of them. Romans, for example, Paul's primary theme in Romans is presenting the gospel, God's plan of salvation and righteousness for all mankind, Jews and non-Jews alike. Because Paul was writing to the church in Rome. Rome is in Italy, right? Italy today. And the Rome was the world power. And Jesus wrote to the church in the Rome. And at the time of the writing, believed to be written in AD 60 to 70, somewhere there. The Rome church at the Rome was not that big church, but in that church there are Jews, there are Italians, there are Greeks, and there are some other people as well. The Gentiles or foreigners, considered the foreigners to Jews. These were there, and that Paul was a person who are educated, who were born not in Jerusalem, not in Israel, but he was born in the land of Greek. So he was educated as a Greek, and he was able to speak the Greek and Spanish and then Jewish. So he was at least trilingual. He was able to speak at least 3 languages. And he is well educated. At today's standard, he is a PhD. So Paul was very educated and he was smart. And he is writing these letters. Most of these letters were written from the prison. He was imprisoned because of his faith, because he was a Christian. He was brought to the judges, and in the prison he was writing many letters. But Romans were written to the Roman Church as to give peace, the major doctrine, the doctrine of gospel to the Roman Church. So that's the major content of the book of Romans. So when you are asked what is the major content of the book of Romans, and you'll answer the gospel. Gospel is the main content. Also, but from chapter 15, Paul gives some instructions to the church of Rome. So there are some instructions for the church, and there are some instructions for each believers, what to do and what not to do. So that's the main content of Rome. And Paul also wrote 1st and 2nd Corinthians. So in the land of Corinth, Corinth is also a land in Asia Minor, and he writes to the church of Corinth. The Corinthian church is one of the earliest church that was established by Paul and some others. And he writes to the church, because the Corinthian church had many issues at the time that Paul is writing. At the beginning, Paul began this church, and it was a healthy church. But later on, the Corinthian church began to have issues and problems. And then even the heresies, these things came into the church. So the first letter to the Corinthians, the Corinthian church, revolved around the theme of problem in Christian conduct in the church. So main thing is how you should act or do, believe in a church. So it tells about the church life. So instructions about how to behave and how to obey and how to obey the authority, and these things are written in the book of Corinthians. So it has to do with progressive sanctification, the continuing development of a holy character. So 1 Corinthians, the book of Corinthians, tells you how a Christian become a Christian, and then how young Christians are learn to be a better Christian, and then that's called sanctification. Sanctification meaning that you are growing in faith, you're becoming more like a Christ, and you become more mature Christian. So the 1 Corinthians tells you this is a young, the new Christian, and then this is a child Christian, this is a mature adult Christian, and tells how each the stage, what to do and what to learn and those things. And it tells you how to practice a life as a Christian. So that's the 1 Corinthians. But one thing that you notice again is the Corinthian church at the time of Paul writing these letters, they had many issues, just like churches today. Today, church has been there like 2,000 plus years, right? This is the year 2020, so at least the church was there almost 2,000 years, right? And after 2,000 years after Christ, after the first church, at the Pentecost in Jerusalem. Now we have many churches, thousands, hundred thousands of churches, and these churches do have problems and issues. So we cannot avoid having issues and problems, but the most problems that we experience in today's church is pretty much the same issues and problems that the Corinthian churches has experienced. So obviously this Paul was personally concerned with the Corinthians' problem, revealing a true pastor's heart. So again, the first Corinthians deals with this. Now, after a few years writing the First Corinthians, Paul writes again to this same church because the problem continues even after the first letters. I mean, letters are just letters. You read it. It is up to the readers to act out, to carry out the instructions that were given. And for many reasons, they were not obeying these instructions, 1 Corinthians. And Paul wanted to go make a visit to this Corinthian church, but he wasn't able to because he was, not only was busy, later on he was in prison. And he was imprisoned many times. So you cannot move around when you are in prison. Especially later days, he was in Rome, but he was residing in a house, but he cannot go out of that house. So he was like in a situation of house arrest. So not being able to make a visit to Corinthian church, then he writes a second letter. And because of the occasion that prompted this letter, Paul had a number of purposes in mind. First, to express the comfort and joy Paul felt because of the Corinthians had responded favorably to his painful letter. To let them know about the trouble he went through in the province of Asia. So as he was in prison and had all these issues and troubles, he is writing the second time to Corinthians and to explain to them the true nature and the high calling of Christian ministry. So the second book, 2 Corinthians, focuses on the ministry, the work, while the 1 Corinthians rather focus on the life of each believer. So rather than the life instructions, the 2 Corinthians focus more on the ministry instructions. So if you want to know how a church should carry out its ministry, its responsibility, its mission, then you go to the 2 Corinthians. And like it says here, they were responding to the 1 Corinthian letter. The first Corinthians were written because there were many issues. So, like it says, they had responded, not 100%, but to some degree. And Paul saying, okay, now you listen to my instructions. I thank you. I encourage you to do so, to continue to do so. And then he adds some instructions for other issues that has risen again in the church during those periods. So these 1st and 2nd Corinthians are given by Paul to Corinthian church to help them to become a better church and better believers. The Galatians, it was written to the church in Galatia. Galatia is another area nearby Corinth. So Galatia and Corinth are two separate the people and the region. So geographically they are separate. So Paul writes to Galatians because they are not able to share their letter sent to Corinth, and the Galatians, they had their own issues, a little different than Corinthians. So Galatians stands as an eloquent and vigorous apologetic for the essential New Testament truth that people are justified by faith in Jesus Christ, by nothing less and nothing more. So the main concern with the letter to Galatians is about this doctrine. And this doctrine, the major focus, you are saved by faith and faith alone. Because in Galatia, there are some Jews saying, you have to follow the law to be saved. Because we have all these 5 books instructing us about how to live as Jews. And you should follow that as well. And Paul is saying no, that the law is there to give you certain instruction. The law is there to let you know that you are not you are not righteous. You are a sinner. So the basic function of the law is to let us know that we are sinners. But some Jewish believers, Jewish Christians, they insisted that you need to follow these laws too. Just obey them, and that there are like a fight and tensions and conflicts between those legalists and those who are not following their instruction. And Paul is saying, you guys are free. You are free from the law, and you are saved by faith, not by following the law. So that's the main content of Galatians. And that they are sanctified not by legalistic works, but by obedience that comes from faith in God's work for them. So Jesus Christ, He died on the cross, and He shed the blood for us, so that blood of Christ cleanses us, because His blood is pure. His blood is without sin. Our blood is contaminated. Our blood is with sin. Our blood is not clean. So the blood of Jesus should wash us and cleanse us. And He not only died on the cross, He lived again. That's called the resurrection. And Paul is telling them, because of that Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for our sins, who has redeemed us, because of that we are forgiven of all sins, and you don't have to do anything to remove your sin from you. So there is no other way to remove your sin or be forgiven except Jesus Christ. That's the message Paul is giving to Galatians who are struggling with this legalistic thoughts. So many Christians even today believe they have to do certain things at the church to be saved, and which is not true. You just believe in Jesus from your heart for true, and then you will be saved. It's still the same message. It hasn't changed. And again, Ephesus is the part of Turkey today, and so we know where that is kind of. So they are called Ephesians, or the land of Ephesus. And Paul is writing the church at Ephesus. So, unlike several of other letters, so the Ephesians is a little different than other letters that Paul had written. Paul writes to Ephesians does not address any particular error or heresy. So the heresies and warnings are not in the letter of Ephesians. So that's kind of unique. While the Galatians and 1st and 2nd Corinthians and even Thessalonians has some of these issues. Paul wrote to expand the horizon of his readers so that they might understand better the dimensions of God's eternal purpose and grace and come to appreciate the high goals God has for the church. So the Ephesians rather focus on what the church is, how precious that church is, and how precious the believers are. How should the believers each other should love one another and support one another, and how to serve one another. So, if you want to know what the ideal church looks like, then you want to go to this the letter to Ephesians, the book of Ephesians, and read. And it tells you what a beautiful the model church is like. And Paul gives these illustrations about the temple being built, and church is just like a temple. And he also tells you how the church is like a body, the hands and the feet and mouth and the ears, how each different the organs and the part of your body functions together to be a whole person. So that's kind of an image that Paul portrays or gives in the book of Ephesians, and it paints a beautiful picture of an ideal church. So that's what Ephesians is about. And then we have the book called Philippians. There's a region called Philippi. Philippi is another town, and Paul's primary purpose in writing this letter was to thank the Philippians for the gift they sent him upon learning of his detention at Rome. However, he makes use of this occasion to fulfill several other desires. So we know this Philippians was written from the prison in Rome. So we call these like a prison letters. There are several of them, and this Philippians is one of them for sure. And he writes from Rome to Philippi because he cannot go to there. He is a prisoner now. And he writes first to give thanks, to appreciate the donations and the money given to him, because he's in the prison. At the time, it is pretty much still the same, but at the time of Paul, the prison only gives you the really basic things, just enough to eat food, enough to survive, and just they don't give you the clothes. So you have to provide your own clothes, your own everything other than just food. And also if you pay the extra money, and they'll give you some better food. So Paul needed some financial support, some money, and the Philippian church kind of gave an offering, a so-called love offering, and designated that offering to be sent to Paul, who is imprisoned in the Rome. So Paul, after receiving those gifts, he writes to give thanks to Philippians. But at the same time, he used this occasion to give some instructions. For example, number 1, to report on his own circumstances. So he's telling them how Paul is doing. And number 2, to encourage the Philippians to stand firm in the face of persecution and rejoice regardless of circumstances. Already this Philippian church, just like other churches, were experiencing persecution from the Roman Empire and the surrounding Jewish the synagogue. Because the Jews hated Christians because they believed Jesus is the Messiah. And many Jews, they did not believe in Jesus. And not only they did not believe in Jesus, they did persecute those Jews who believe in Jesus as the Messiah. So there are that tension everywhere in the land of diaspora. I mean, this is not Israel. Philippi is a non-Israel territory. And there were Jews who are living there. And there were Christian Jews and non-Christian Jews. And they were in conflict. So there were persecutions from the indigenous people, the local people, from the Jewish Jewish non-Christians, and from the Roman Empire. So there are multiple layers of persecutions, oppressions against the Christians at the time. And Paul is writing to them to comfort them, telling, you guys are okay. Just endure, and then we'll see that eternal peace, the eternal hope, and the day will come when everything is over. No more suffering, no more killing, no more dying, and we'll be in peace forever. So that's a kind of message that Paul writes to Philippians. And number 3, to exhort them to humility and unity. And while there are persecutions, it's easy for the church to divide, to be discouraged. And Paul writes to them to exalt them and telling them you need to be united as one. Read about the Old Testament. Number 1, this Old Testament book is considered to be the earliest written book, and it records the account of a righteous man who suffers under terrible circumstances. He loses all his children and the house and his livestock. He loses everything just one day, overnight. And it's a story of Job. Answer is T. Okay?
T.
Yeah, A, B, C, D, T. Job. Or Job is the answer. So he suffers, and he says, in spite of all these bad things happening, he says, and I still believe in God, and I will not go against God. So that's the main message in this book. Number 2, this Old Testament wisdom book was written to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young, and to make the wise even wiser. Okay, it's B, Proverbs. The answer is B, Proverbs. And there are many wisdom in this book. Okay, number 3, the author of this Old Testament wisdom book puts his powers of wisdom to work, to examine the human experience. So keyword is human experience, and assess the human situation. So it tells a lot about, what happens in human life, suffering, sickness, and pain and sorrow. He covers all of these issues. And the answer is D, Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes. Number 4, Old Testament prophecy books do not deal with. So what are the subjects of the Old Testament prophecy? A, global faith. B, my personal faith. C, fate of Israel. D, messianic prophecy. The answer is our personal faith is not written in the Old Testament prophecies. So answer is B. Okay, number 5. Which of the following is not considered as a major prophet? So there is several major prophecy, and A, Micah, B, Isaiah, C, Daniel, D, book of Jeremiah. That's not F, it's E, Ezekiel. The answer would be Micah. Micah is considered a minor prophet. So Micah or Micah. Answer is A. Number 6. Which of the following is not considered as a minor prophet? So A, Hosea, B, Joel, C, Amos, D, Obadiah, E, Jeremiah. The answer is Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a major prophet. Number 7, the same question. Which of the following is not considered as a minor prophecy or prophet? A, Matthew, B, Nahum, C, Habakkuk, D, Zephaniah, E, Haggai. The answer is Matthew. Matthew is a New Testament writer. Okay. The answer is A. Number 8. Which of the following is not considered as a minor prophet? Again, A, Jonah, B, Micah, C, Luke, D, Zechariah, E, Malachi. The answer is C, Luke. Luke again is a New Testament writer. 7. Answer is A, Matthew. Number 9. This name refers to the new covenant or promise between God and humanity through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. A, Bible, B, Old Testament, C, 4 Gospels, D, New Testament. Answer is D, New Testament. So New Testament means new promise, new covenant. Number 10, New Testament does not contain the following topic. A, life and ministry of Jesus Christ. B, the growth and the impact of the early church. C, instructive letters to early believers or early church. D, prophecy about the first coming of the Messiah. The prophecy about the first coming of the Messiah is written in the Old Testament. So answer would be D. Okay? So that's the quiz. And let's continue with our New Testament books. We are on letters. So again, New Testament books has 3 topics. Narratives, and then letters, and prophecy. There's only one prophecy, the book of Revelation. Then we have 5 narratives, which is 4 Gospels and the Acts of Apostles. And the 4 Gospels is 3 plus 1 because first three books share the same kind of perspective, while the Gospel of John has some a little different approach to the story of Jesus. So we call these three books synoptic gospel. You don't need to know that, but it says synoptic means same view, same perspective. And so we're on one of those 21 letters. We have 21 letters in the New Testament, and Philippians is one of them. Colossians. Okay, next one is Colossians. Colossians also is written to the church in Colossia, and Paul's purpose is to refute the Colossian heresy. Nowadays, issue is again heresy. Heresy is one of the major issues that happened within the New Testament church, and Paul needs to address these heresies and tell them, this is not what Jesus said. This is not the gospel. It may sound like a gospel, it is not. It's not true gospel, it's false gospel. So Paul needs to make it clear that what the gospel content is. That's the same issue today. And some even claim himself to be Christ. Even today, and that's kind of absurd, but it happens. So today, still heresies prevail. They claim they are Christians, but they are not. Actually, they are not. Same thing happened in the time of Paul. So Paul is writing to Colossia for that. Okay, so second point. To accomplish this goal, Paul, exalts Christ as the very image of God. So Christ is the image of God. He is the creator. Jesus Christ, He is the creator. The pre-existing sustainer of all things. The head of the church. The first to be resurrected, the fullness of that deity in bodily form, and the reconciler. So in this book, in the Colossians, Paul made sure who Jesus is, who the Christ is. And one thing that we need to notice is that Christ Jesus He has been before the creation. I mean, He is the creator. So who's the creator? Creator is God. So Paul is saying Jesus Christ is the same as God the Father, the creator. He puts the Jesus at the same rank with the Father God, the creator, the mighty Yahweh and Jehovah. So to the Jews, this is something new. I mean, they were not in their head. There's no one who is the same as God except God Himself. But in Paul's theology, in Paul's doctrine, in Paul's understanding, the Jesus Christ that we have seen and we have known, we have touched, we have talked with, spoke with, He indeed is God Himself. God Himself came down to us in bodily form, which is called, this is a new word, might be new word. Let's see, where is the space? Oops. So this is the word. Incarnation means that God became flesh, the body. So He comes into the word. Here's the word. That is means so this physical word consists of a time, space, and material. And the God that we know, He is out. I mean, God is not controlled by time. He is beyond the space. He is beyond physical. So that's who God is. Now, what happens is God comes into this limited world, into time, into space, and in physical form, material form. So He has those flesh and bones, just like we do. And He has to live, he is born and live day by day within the time and within this limited space. Within the limited space means that God, can only be one place at one time. But God, we know, He can be anywhere at any time. That's called omnipresence, meaning all present. He is present anywhere, anytime. But He limits Himself, come into the time, space, and to be physical, into material. So that's the concept of incarnation. So God decides to come into His creation, but He is creator. And the idea of incarnation is unique to this Jews and the Christian faith. I'm not sure about the Islamic faith, but for Christian and Jew, the idea of incarnation is there. So that means God becomes just like one of us. So what does it tell you? Not only it means that He humbled Himself, but it means that He is experiencing what we experience. He understands from our point of view, from our experience, our status. So God, He decides to experience our problems, our issues, our troubles. So that's the meaning of incarnation. And in the book of Colossians, this thing called incarnation is emphasized. And Paul is writing to Colossian Christians. It is Jesus Christ is the God incarnated, God who came into the world. That's the major message. And now, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. So Paul writes 2 letters to Thessalonian church. Thessalonia is another geographical region, and although the thrust of the letter is varied, the subject of eschatology, meaning doctrine of the last things. Eschatology means the doctrine of last things, seems to be predominant in both Thessalonian letters. So 1st Thessalonian and 2nd Thessalonian, both letters deals with the things that are going to happen at the end of human history. So we, as a human being, kind of worries about what is going to happen at the end of the earth. And it's not just curiosity. It's a curiosity about something that is unknown, but it goes beyond that. There's a fear about what is going to happen to the future generation. I mean, what if it happens at my time? The end of the world, it's gonna come. We know that it's gonna come. Even non-believers, they kind of think about how to, what should I do when the world ends suddenly? And it is going to end suddenly, according to the Bible. So, even though you never heard about the Bible or God or the Christ or anything, there is an idea about every culture in South America, in Australia, in Africa, in Asia. We do have these thoughts about the end of the world. So the eschatology is a big word, about the thing of the last days. So in Thessalonians it writes about that. And every chapter of 1 Thessalonians ends with a reference to the second coming of Christ. It is important. See, every chapter of the book in the 1 Thessalonians ends with a reference to the second coming of Christ. Second coming of Christ equals to the last day, the end of, or the beginning of the end of the whole world. Okay? Okay, again, the beginning of the end of the human history. So when Jesus comes second time as a Messiah, as the King, then that means the world is begun to end. So Paul is telling Thessalonians about this, and to us, as we read after 2,000 years, we read this Thessalonian and we know that end hasn't come yet, but it is going to come soon enough. The second Thessalonian is a continuing this part 2 of 1 Thessalonian. It carries the same theme, and since the situation in the Thessalonian church has not changed substantially, Paul purpose in writing is very much the same as in his first letter to them. So 2 Thessalonian is just another copy or another second instruction, just same as the 1 Thessalonian. So there's not much difference in the contents of 1 and 2 Thessalonian. They are pretty much the same. And he writes, number 1, to encourage persecuted believers. So the first reason to writing the 2 Thessalonian is to encourage them, the believers, about the persecution. Number 2, to correct the misunderstanding concerning the Lord's return. So again, the second coming of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, is emphasized as the second point. So this is like a second time that Paul is writing to Thessalonians about the second coming of Christ Jesus. Number 3, to exhort the Thessalonians to be steadfast and to work for a living. The end is coming soon. Paul believed that the end is going to come very soon, sooner than we think. So within like a decade or two, 10 or 20 years, that he thought Jesus is going to come back. But at the same time, he said, we do not know exact time and hour. So what do? We continue to work. We continue to live. We continue to get married and have children. He's saying, don't change anything. Do what you are doing faithfully and properly. And at the same time, be vigilant. Be sensitive that Jesus can come at any time. So that's kind of tension that we should experience, we should exercise even today. So for us Christians, the believers, there's a tension of knowing that this thing is going to end suddenly. And that when that happens, everything will be over, just like that, overnight. But at the same time, we know that we need to live. We need to do everything, and we should do our best in doing that. So that's kind of Christian tension that we need to be aware of. Okay, and see. And we have two books written to Timothy. Timothy is a guy who also was born, and he is like he's half Jew and half Greek. So he's a mixed, and we know that Timothy's mother was a Jew, and his grandmother was a Jew, and his grandmother and mother taught him the Bible. So he was raised as a Jew, even though he was a half Jew. In their tradition, if you are in the line of father, if his father was a Jew, he will be considered 100% Jew or Jewish. But if the mother is a Jew, that's a different story. But in Timothy's case, his father was a Greek, a Gentile, non-Jew, while the mother was a Jew. But he becomes a Christian. He becomes a believer. And Saint Paul considered him just like a son. It is written in the Bible. So Paul says, I consider Timothy just like my own son. So it's like a son-father kind of relationship. And it's about the mentorship. So as we read this Timothy, 1st and 2nd Timothy, we find a lot about Christian mentorship. How you should mentor your younger believers. So here's a picture of Paul being a mature believer, mature minister, a mature pastor in today's term. So Paul is a mature pastor, while Timothy, also a minister, also a pastor of a church. And he's a young pastor, just a young pastor beginning to have his own congregation and own ministry. So for Christian leaders, it is a good book to read, 1st and 2nd Timothy, good book to study. And it says, during his 4th missionary journey, so we know that Paul took at least 3 missionary journey, or 4, and the last journey is considered as number 4, missionary journey number 4. And Paul had instructed Timothy to care for the church at Ephesus. So this is what happened. Paul, he pioneers several churches, and the church at Ephesus, which is in today's Turkey, it is the church that Paul has established, and then he delegates that church to Timothy and tells Timothy, you're going to be the pastor of this Ephesus church. So he becomes a pastor, and then he writes to him while he went on the Macedonia. Okay, point number 2. When Paul realized that he might not return to Ephesus in the near future, he wrote this first letter to Timothy to develop the charge he had given his young assistant. So this is what happens. Paul now he's in his fourth missionary journey. He thought he's going to come back to Ephesus to help with Timothy, but the Holy Spirit tells him otherwise. So Paul thinking, I'm not going to come back in near future or soon. So he decides to write these letters and help him to become a better pastor. So by writing this, Paul helps Timothy to become a better pastor. And this is the first of the pastoral episode. And so this letter by Paul, we have something called the pastoral epistle, meaning pastoral letters. And there is honor the prison letters. So two different kinds. That's the kind of category that scholars make. So this is one of the pastoral letters, and 2 Timothy. Paul was concerned about the welfare of the churches during the time of persecution under Nero. This Emperor Nero. He's a famous guy, Roman emperor, and this is when this is written. And he admonishes Timothy to guard the gospel, to preserve in it, to keep on preaching it, and if necessary, to suffer for it. This is the second pastoral episode. So this is the pastoral letter number 2. And in it, Paul is making sure that Timothy stays as a good pastor of a church at Ephesus. And these are things, again, he encourages to guard the gospel and to preserve and to keep preaching the gospel no matter what, and then suffer for the gospel. So suffering for the gospel is actually the main theme in the letter to 2 Timothy. So who is willing to, those who are willing to just give his or her life for the ministry of the gospel, Paul is telling them it is for them, necessary for them to consider the suffering. You are going to suffer as a pastor, evangelist, or the church worker. So that's the kind of message Timothy is telling his disciple Timothy. So Paul and Timothy had a very special relationship, and we today we call a mentorship, but it's beyond a mentorship. And we need to learn, because every Christian is called to do the same thing that Paul did. And we are to raise the new leaders, the younger leaders, every time, whenever it is possible. So that is main mandate for every single Christian. And a pastor is someone who is doing for living. But other than pastors, every believers in a church are required to do the same thing. Now, next book is Titus. Titus, apparently Paul introduces Christianity in Crete. Crete is a small island in the Mediterranean Sea. When he and Titus visited the island, after which he left Titus there to organize the converts. So Titus is another pastor for the church in Crete, and he is left there. Paul and Titus took the missionary journey, and now at this island, he drops him off. So Titus becomes the pastor to the church at Crete. And Paul sent a letter with the Zenas and Apollos, who were on a journey that took them through Crete and guidance to give Titus personal authorization, meeting opposition, instructions about faith and conduct, and warning about false teachers. Okay, this is the last of the pastoral epistle. So we have 1st and 2nd Timothy and the letter to Titus. So these are 3 letters considered as pastoral letters. So pastoral letters, there are 3 of them. And Titus now is a pastor to that church in that island called Crete. And Paul is doing the same thing that he did to Timothy. So Titus is another mentoree by Paul. So Paul mentors Titus.